Good morning, and thank you all for coming. Today our subcommittee will explore the status of the Champlain, New York border crossing. We have invited representatives of the U.S. Customs Service, the U.S. Marshals Service, and Immigration and Naturalization Service, which also administers the U.S. Border Patrol, to testify here today. And we thank Mr. Michael D'Ambrosio, District Field Director at U.S. Customs, and Ms. Frances Holmes, District Director at INS, for being here today. We also are pleased to have with us representatives of the employees of two agencies, Mr. Carl Duford, an INS Inspector and President of the Champlain Chapter of the American Federation of Government Employees, Mr. Thomas Keefe, a Customs Inspector and President of St. Lawrence Chapter 138 of the National Treasury Employees Union. The subcommittee is vitally interested in ensuring the effective functioning of these agencies, and we will continue to work with them and their employees to ensure the continued security and effective administration of our nation's border. We've also been joined by Senator Ron Stafford, head of the Senate Finance Committee, and look forward to having his opening welcome here in a few minutes, and for his leadership in the state legislature, I'm sure on a regular basis with these issues that we only occasionally deal with in Washington. When examining border policies, we must also seek the input of representatives of the local community, particularly the business community, whose livelihood is directly affected by changes at the border. We also welcome Mr. Gary Douglas, Executive Director of the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce. We thank everyone for taking time this morning to join us on this important occasion. Even before the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, this subcommittee was considering ways to improve both the security of our nation's borders and the efficient flow of international commerce, travel, and tourism. Continuing problems with illegal immigration and the smuggling of drugs and other contraband over the southern and northern borders and the threat of terrorism have prompted calls to hire more federal law enforcement officers and to expand the physical and technological infrastructure needed to allow those officers to work effectively. The attacks of September 11th have emphasized the necessity of dealing with the terrorist threat as well as the problems of narcotics interdiction and illegal immigration. At the same time, long delays at border crossings resulting from the increased security measures put in place after September 11th have raised concerns about the effect of these policies on trade, tourism, and travel. Congress has been considering numerous proposals to deal with these problems. For example, the House of Representatives and the Senate have now both passed anti-terrorist legislation that, among other measures, would authorize the tripling of Border Patrol agents, INS inspectors, and customs inspectors along the northern border. It is unclear, however, how quickly any of these agencies can meet these requirements. Moreover, it is unclear what the impact of the new emphasis on anti-terrorism will be on personnel decisions in each of these agencies. This hearing and the hearing held yesterday at Highgate Springs, Vermont, are the first in a series of field hearings which will be held by this subcommittee at border crossings and ports of entry throughout the United States. At each such location, this subcommittee will assess the problems facing the federal agencies, local lawmakers, and community and business leaders with respect to border policy. We will focus on what new resources are needed for the federal government most effectively to administer the border crossing, as well as what new policies could be pursued to ease the burdens being placed on commerce, travel, and tourism. We will also explore how the new emphasis on preventing terrorism may affect the ability of these agencies to carry out their other vital missions. These issues are all extremely important and extremely urgent, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about ways to address them. And if I want to add too that we had what precipitated this series, in addition to our oversight responsibilities over justice and commerce and the narcotics issue, is a U.S.-Canada parliamentary exchange group. Last May, I co-chaired the Trans-Border section of that parliamentary group, and we had agreed to hold several hearings along the northern border about problems we were having already in trying to make sure that we could facilitate ease of movement and meet the needs that we were asking along the border prior to the September 11th, which only put more pressure on the borders. Also then with the U.S.-Mexico parliamentary group, we've agreed to do a number on the southern border. In December we'll be in Brownsville, Laredo, and McAllen on the Monterey corridor. Then the second week in December up in the Vancouver corridor, in Puget Sound, looking at water Coast Guard questions as well as the Blaine border crossing. We'll also be doing Detroit, Buffalo, where we work with the people there in San Diego and El Paso Nogales section. So we're going to systematically, over the next, we're going to do it over 12 months. We're now pushing for a 5-month period, and this is our first region that we're holding the hearings yesterday at Highgate Springs and today here, and then we're visiting some of the border crossings in between, as well as with the Border Patrol and with the Coast Guard in each area to learn where the gaps are. When you put pressure on one point, it tends to move, and if we're not thinking a step ahead in both how to accommodate commerce and to protect the citizens of the United States, we'll fall behind. With that, I'd like to yield to my friend Congressman McHugh, a more senior member of the committee, also has been a long time subcommittee chair before he went over to Armed Services and leadership position there too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. More senior means older, I take it. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I have a prepared statement that I would ask unanimous consent be entered in its entirety, and just make a few comments if I might. First of all, I want to add my words of appreciation and welcome that you have just stated to all of our panelists here today. We do look forward to their comments, and a special welcome to my former colleague in the State Senate, Ron Stafford, who certainly needs no introduction nor explanation to these good folks of the terrific job he does, not just for this region, although he certainly does that, but for the entire state. So welcome to all of you. But as well, Mr. Chairman, I want to express both my words of welcome and appreciation to you. All of us who have the honor of serving in any legislative body always think that our districts that we represent is someplace special, and I'm certainly no exception to that. I hope that during your travels, as hectic as they have been, you've had a chance to see the true beauty of this region. We hope you had a chance to enjoy it. If not, please come back. There's about 13,000 square miles of the 24th district to the south and the west of here that we think are equally as special as well. But I particularly appreciate the effort that you've made to be here. You mentioned yesterday your hearing at Highgate Springs. I know last evening you had an opportunity to go up into Canada and meet some of the folks up there. We're thrilled they let you back in here to our side of the border. And I have long been very impressed with the very ambitious hearing schedule that you defined here this morning, and speaks very highly of your commitment, and more importantly, your understanding of the very formidable issues that face us. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, through your work, September 11th, while bringing unimagined and truly profound changes to this country, was not really the beginning of the challenges that we're facing along both the northern and the southern border. But I think it has brought new focus to the challenges here in the northern border of the region. This issue has really been at the core of focus for many of us for some time now, working with great leaders like Governor Pataki, Senator Stafford, Assemblyman Chris Ortloff, with the local government representatives here in the North Country, Clinton and Essex County in particular, with our partners on the Canadian side, and of course with the business community from whom we'll hear here today. We've had some success. We've initiated what we're calling a border of excellence that will, when completed, produce about a $30 million program designed to modernize and to streamline the facilities located here at Champlain. But the fact of the matter is, new buildings, new processing lanes, safer approaches, for all of their importance, are simply not enough. The federal officials that staff this crossing, all of the crossings across the northern border, have been and remain simply amazing. Long hours, very effective work, often thankless tasks with incredible efficiency and with incredible effectiveness. This northern border spans, as you know, some 4,000 miles. And yet, if you look at in just one area alone, the customs area, only 14% of the assigned inspectors nationwide are stationed along that northern border. Only some 1,000 inspectors. And if you compare that to a place like JFK International Airport, where there are 500 inspectors at that one point, we can begin to better understand the very difficult manpower challenge that these good folks face. Yes, we need better facilities. We need safer access. We need, clearly, the latest in technology, but most important, in my opinion, we need the personnel who can make these crossings work and who can keep our borders safe and at the same time, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, keep them effectively processing that flow of commerce. The Canadians are, as I mentioned, our partners in this effort. Ours is an extraordinary relationship. We are each other's largest trading partners. And while I'll defer to the Canadians to describe their perspective, but to those of us here in the North Country, they are our partners, they are our welcome neighbors, and they represent collectively an irreplaceable thread in the economic fabric of our region. Mr. Chairman, during a brief conversation we had just last week off the House floor in the Speaker's lobby, I was very impressed with your comments about the critical nature of balancing security with the essential flow of commerce, and I couldn't agree more. And that, it seems to me, is our two-part challenge. And I know, Mr. Chairman, that's your objective as well, and why we deeply appreciate your making the effort to bring this subcommittee here to help fill in the pieces of this puzzle that obviously it's in all our interest to solve. And like you, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, to learn their perspectives, hopefully to borrow from their expertise so that we can forge an effective policy to meet this very critical challenge. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the hearing ahead.
I'd like to do a few procedural matters. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to submit written statements and questions for the hearing record, and any answers to written questions provided by the witnesses also be included in the record. I also ask unanimous consent that all exhibits, documents, and other materials referred to by members and the witnesses may be included in the hearing record, and that all members be permitted to revise and extend their remarks without objection if so ordered. Also for the record, I ask unanimous consent that Mr. McHugh, a member of the full committee, be permitted to participate in this subcommittee hearing. Now, as a government form and oversight, it's our general practice that all witnesses have to be sworn in and testify under oath. So if you could each stand, raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses have each answered in the affirmative. Our committee, for those of you who aren't familiar, when the Republicans took over Congress, this was one of the more infamous committees that we started with Waco and proceeded into the travel office investigations, the all sorts of different investigation type things, which is why we, as an oversight committee, have to do the swearing in. But Senator Stafford, it's a great honor to have you here today. You've been a longtime leader, respected leader in this area, and if you'd like to make a few opening comments, we'd be privileged to hear them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I'm under oath, so I have to be careful what I say about Mr. McHugh. But on a serious note, we all receive many, many invitations to attend a number of gatherings, meetings, that type of thing. We certainly can't go to all of them. And I think even my staff had indicated that we had a conflict, and I changed that because I wanted to be here personally First, to thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Souter, and Congressman McHugh for being here today. And you're here considering issues that are so important to our area. In fact, you can see why John is so well respected, and we think so much of him in this area. The statement he made covered it very well. My dad was a Clinton County farmer. He had a lot of sense, and he always said that it's always good to keep your mouth closed and let people think you don't know anything than to open it and remove all doubt. So I won't get into real specifics here. You will have professionals here, others here in this area talking with you, testifying. But again, I certainly want to compliment those in our area. Gary Douglas, I've mentioned one name, so I should mention about 20. But all here who have been so concerned about the root problems and issues you're here today to consider, as I've mentioned. John, I think, has mentioned this. It isn't difficult. We're here between New York City and Montreal, two of the major cities on the North American continent, and we're here right in the main line of travel. We trust you will use good judgment. I know Congressman McHugh has been right in the forefront and has been talking to you, Mr. Chairman, and others. You'll find our people here very knowledgeable. They know exactly what they're talking about. And as John mentioned, we hope you'll come back. And I'm sure out of this meeting and others, we'll have some decisions which make it possible, as John said, for our people who work here, who do such a tremendous job, challenged in so many ways, and hours and in other areas. And with that, I will let those who are going to testify concerning some of the specifics, some of the others, not let them, but I will make it possible for them to testify. And thank you for being here from Wendell Willkie's state. We all thought a great deal of him up here in Clinton County. And on the other hand, you've had some other great people from Indiana. And as you mentioned earlier, Notre Dame will be back. But thank you so much for being with us. And John, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I thank you, and I know that your schedule is tight, and we appreciate you working us in, and at whatever point you need to leave, and if you want to make additional comments as we go. But we really recognize that what we do here at the federal level has a huge impact in every state and local area. It's important that we work together on the questions involved, because one of the side tragedies of the major attack is what's happening to our economy. And if we can't figure out how to keep people working and in their homes and getting their bills paid, it will all come to naught in our security efforts. Mr. D'Ambrosio?
Thank you.
Good morning. Chairman Souter, Congressman McHugh, thank you for your invitation to testify and for providing me the chance to appear before you today. I would like to discuss the efforts of the United States Customs Service to address the terrorism threat and the challenges that exist along the U.S.-Canada border, commonly called the northern border. As the guardian of our nation's borders, Customs plays a major role in the great struggle against the forces of terror in which America is now engaged. The Customs Service enforces over 400 laws and regulations for more than 40 federal agencies. Naturally, the northern border is a major focus of our efforts. Protecting our broad, expanding economic ties with Canada while preventing terrorists from exploiting increased traffic flows is a key goal for the northern border. The immense flow of trade and travel between the U.S. and Canada requires that our two nations continue to work together to enhance the protection of our vital interests at this critical time. Trade and travel between the U.S. and Canada has jumped dramatically since the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994. The Port of Champlain alone now clears approximately 400,000 trucks and nearly 1 million vehicles a year. Champlain is also on a major highway that connects the large metropolitan areas of Montreal and New York City and points beyond. The Customs Service was addressing security along our frontier with Canada well before the attacks of September 11th. The previous arrest of an Algerian terrorist, the Millennium Bomber Ahmed Ressam, by customs inspectors at Fort Angeles, Washington, in December 1999, is an example of our previous efforts. That arrest also set into motion a range of measures to bolster security along our northern flank. In response to the terrorist attacks of September 11th, the United States Customs Service immediately implemented a Level 1 alert for all personnel and ports of entry. This is our highest state of alert, calling for sustained, intensive anti-terrorist operations. We remain at Level 1 alert today. Under Level 1 alert, all ports of entry have increased vehicle, passenger, cargo, and mail examinations commensurate with the threat at their location. On the northern border, we have suspended remote inspection reporting systems and are staffing every port of entry with at least 2 officers, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. In order to meet the demands of maintaining this highest state of alert, nearly 100 additional customs inspectors have been temporarily detailed to northern border posts to ensure that this minimum staffing requirement applies even to our most remote locations. In addition to the Customs Service's enhanced efforts and in keeping with the tradition of partnership that has always marked a close relationship between our two nations and customs agencies, Canada Customs has pledged their full support and cooperation in preventing terrorists and the implements of terrorism from transiting our northern border. We are working on a priority basis with Canada to identify additional steps to be taken now to enhance security. We have also been asking for the public's and the trade community's patience as we work to protect our nation from the immediate threat without turning the border into an obstacle to legitimate trade or our lifetime freedom of movement, although traffic volume is markedly lower since then. Despite initial concerns about our Level 1 alert placing an undue burden upon normal border flows, we have in fact succeeded in reducing waiting times at the border to the levels they were at prior to the September 11th attacks. Cooperation with our partners from Customs Canada and in the business community has been instrumental to our success. As some of you may know, some of our customs facilities on the northern border need to be updated. To improve these facilities, Customs recently was provided with $20 million for resources and technology to support northern border security and aging infrastructure. Equipment will be deployed to various northern border locations. For example, at the Port of Champlain, construction has started for the installation of a vehicle and cargo inspection system, or VACIS for short. When completed, this will be the first permanent truck X-ray facility on the northern border. A portable version of this technology is being procured for Champlain and should arrive at the port by the end of this calendar year. Customs inspectors at the Port of Champlain are also currently using other technology, including radiation detectors to detect radioactive material used for weapons of mass destruction, and vapor trace technology to help us detect the presence of narcotics. In addition, the Customs Service plans to use part of this $20 million in new funding to enhance the security of the ports of entry all along the northern border by investment in key elements of infrastructure. There are many roads that connect to the border which are unmonitored and allow for individuals or small groups to gain entry undetected. Most remote, limited-hour ports of entry have no monitoring or assessment capabilities. Our infrastructure investments will be prioritized to those locations that have the highest risk. The Customs Service plans to install digital video security systems which can call remote monitoring locations when they are enabled at selected locations. These systems will complement pre-existing remote video inspection system sites. Customs Service also plans to install additional lighting and appropriate barriers, gates, and bollards at these locations that lack barriers to prevent unauthorized vehicle crossings and to increase officer safety and deny anonymity to law violators. From an overall perspective, the vast volume of trade and traffic on our northern border has put immense pressure on our ability to enforce the nation's laws while facilitating international trade, even before September 11th. After September 11th, our challenge has risen to a new level. Although we have taken many steps to address these challenges, such as the planned improvements to our facilities and the temporary detailing of additional customs inspectors to northern border posts, we still face many challenges. We are working within Treasury and the administration to address these challenges. For example, we are developing threat assessments and a longer-term perimeter security strategy for dealing with them to secure our homeland defenses, including the northern border. In considering such a long-term plan, several core questions will need to be addressed. First, how do we measure the added protection or risk reduction we will realize from additional investments on the border? How will customs plans properly interact and integrate with the other border agencies, the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense? What are alternative means of securing our far-flung border crossings? What is the best system for examining the vast amounts of cargo coming across the border? I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Congressman McHugh, for this opportunity to testify. The U.S. Customs Service will continue to make every effort possible, working with our fellow inspection agencies within the administration and with congressional leaders, our Canadian counterparts, and the business community, to address your concerns and those of the American people. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Congressman McHugh, thank you for inviting me here today to address you on behalf of the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service. The INS, which is part of the Department of Justice, has a staff of over 30,000 people who enforce the Immigration and Nationality Act. Their duties include the inspection of persons applying for admission to the United States, facilitating the legal entry of persons into the United States, detecting illegal entry, arresting and deporting criminal aliens, and naturalizing legal permanent residents for United States citizenship. The Uniformed Inspections Branch of the INS provides the staffing at our nation's ports of entry. Additional staff is assigned to the investigations, detention and removal, adjudications, and administrative support sections of the INS. The United States-Canadian border is over 4,000 miles long. The INS Buffalo District portion of this border extends from the Vermont Lake Champlain area west to Buffalo and Lake Erie. The district extends south to just north of New York City and includes Binghamton in the west and the southern tier. The district office is located in Buffalo with a sub-office in Albany and small offices in Syracuse and Rochester. There are 16 major land border ports of entry and multiple harbors where pleasure boats and commercial vessels arrive and are inspected. Additionally, we inspect Amtrak trains in 2 locations and undertake immigration pre-clearance activities at Canadian airports in Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto. We have 289 full-time inspection staff and additional part-time or seasonal staff. In fiscal year 2001, the Buffalo District completed 40 million inspections. The Champlain Port of Entry is located 45 miles south of Montreal and 350 miles north of New York City. It is located on Interstate Highway 87. The current Champlain facility opened in August of 1973 and is scheduled for modification and expansion in the coming years as funds are allocated. The INS management staff at Champlain provides oversight to ports of entry from Rouse's Point, which is adjacent to Lake Champlain, to Port Covington to the west, and to ports of entry in between. There are currently 38 full-time permanent staff here with additional part-time staff. The Champlain staff is responsible for conducting inspections at the Amtrak train, which arrives daily from Montreal at Rouse's Point. It also inspects pleasure boats from Canada, which arrive on Lake Champlain. Our primary activity, however, is inspecting arriving passengers in private vehicles. We complete this work with the United States Customs Service, and the Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Inspection Service makes up the 3rd government agency which conducts inspections here at Champlain. Besides the inspection of arriving person, the INS Champlain also handles a significant number of aliens and United States citizens returned from Canada under the U.S.-Canada Reciprocal Agreement. Of these aliens, about 300 annually are denied refugee status in Canada and are returned to us just here at this port of entry, and they require interviewing to determine if they are allowed to be in the United States. Some are processed for removal hearings from the United States, and some are held in custody. Over the last few years, we have seen a decline in the number of inspections performed by our inspectors here at Champlain. For example, 5 years ago in fiscal year 1996, this master port, the larger port, performed over 5.5 million inspections. In fiscal year ending 2001, that figure was slightly over 3.8 million inspections. The INS Champlain has held 3 stakeholder meetings in 2001 to meet with individuals, local employers, Truckers Association, the Plattsburgh Chamber of Commerce, and other interested parties to discuss methods to improve the processing of applicants for admission here at the port of entry. Suggestions have been received and implemented. The management staff is committed to facilitating admissible applicants while enforcing the laws and regulations of the Immigration and Nationality Act. In response to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, there has been increased vigilance at the border. Annual leave of inspectors has been canceled. Overtime has increased, and additional staff has been detailed to enhance border security. We remain cognizant that legitimate cross-border traffic must be allowed while ensuring that persons who are inadmissible or who wish to harm this country will be denied entry. Staffing has been doubled at the small ports of entry so that no inspector works alone. More applicants for admission are checked through law enforcement databases, and all adult applicants are asked to produce government-issued identification. Trunks of passenger cars are open and contents scanned. Within the first few days following September 11, there were traffic delays. Today, however, there are minimal waits for passenger cars, in most cases under 10 minutes. Lanes are open and closed based on need. The Immigration and Naturalization Service remains committed to securing the borders of this country against those who wish to harm it, while facilitating legitimate business traffic and travelers. The INS Buffalo District was pleased to receive one additional inspector position for Champlain during the fiscal year 2001, and a total of 8 for our district land border ports. We are proud of the service we provide to the public at the U.S.-Canada border, and look forward to working with the Congress to keeping up that level of service and to help protect the security of our nation. The administration's request for additional staff and technology resources is of the utmost importance now. Additional resources will greatly assist the INS in securing the border without closing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Congressman McHugh, for allowing the INS to give this testimony regarding the Champlain Corridor and the Buffalo District Border Port operations. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. I'd like to start with a few clarification questions. Thank you, Senator. In your district for customs, do you go also to Buffalo, or do you go to Eastern Great Lakes?
It's all of New York State. It's the same as Ms. Holmes' area. All of New York State except for New York City. So my office is actually just on the outskirts of Buffalo.
If both of you could provide, for the record, some indication in your regions of the amount of traffic at the different points, so we can kind of get a feel. We originally were going to start with the Buffalo Niagara Falls crossings, and when I could work out the times with Congressman LaFalce and Congressman Quinn, we couldn't work them out with the Canadian parliamentarians. Both of us had to cancel one time, so we will be doing another hearing on that in that zone. But I'm particularly interested, if I can ask a couple questions on the area between here and Buffalo. Where would the largest crossing be between here and Buffalo?
Well, it's the greater Buffalo area between the Peace Bridge and the bridges at Niagara Falls.
But something at Kingston along the St. Lawrence River would
Yes,
that be?
in Congressman McHugh's area. Actually, our answers will be different because
For trucking
for commercial purposes, the largest crossing is at Alexandria Bay, but for private vehicles, it's at Messina.
Are you talking other than Champlain?
Yes. Between Champlain and Buffalo, the area of New York State. And in those crossings, how for example, at Alexandria Bay, how does that in size compare with Champlain for customs?
Okay, at Alexandria Bay, we have...
And you said yours is Alexandria Bay, and yours would be
For
Messina.
passengers, it would be Messina, New York.
Okay, so I want to ask you the question on Messina, but on Alexandria Bay, how does it compare to Champlain, roughly?
In terms of traffic volume, at Alexandria Bay, there's roughly 150,000, 200,000 trucks a year, roughly 500,000 to 700,000 vehicles a year. Let me just clarify that the Port of Champlain provides commercial support for Alexandria Bay. Because Customs is engaged in commercial activities, which Immigration Service is not, the Port of Champlain has a commercial staff which consists of import specialists and entry control specialists who provide the commercial coverage that goes all the way west to Alexandria Bay. And we have large commercial operations at Alexandria Bay, Ogdensburg at the bridge, Messina, and a smaller operation at Shadow Gate. So the volume that's handled there is handled by inspectors for release purposes, but the entire range of commercial processing is handled here at Champlain. After the release takes place, there's what's called an entry summary. It's the assessment of duty, correct country of origin, all of the work that goes into finalizing the importation is done here at Champlain.
And to just kind of get a context from you, in the size of that operation, if you put them all together, is that roughly half of Buffalo Erie or more than half?
Now look at some
Yeah, sure.
data that I
Let me
have
ask
here.
you a couple of the same questions Ms. Holmes about. From on Messina, do you handle it similarly? Is it based out of here going west and then?
No, it is not. We have a master port at Thousand Islands, which is Alexandria Bay, and that port director would be responsible for the Thousand Islands Bridge, Ogdensburg, which is the next bridge north, and then Messina, which is the next bridge after that. And then this portion of the border is under the Champlain port of entry. But Messina has a great deal of cross-border traffic. It is busy. It is not as busy as this port here as at Champlain, and it has a different type of traffic because it is not between two major cosmopolitan cities. It's more local traffic going back and forth, but it is a very busy port of entry. It also is not supported well by in fact, it has a very poor facility and outdated structure for the size of the traffic that goes through there, and that exacerbates part of the flow problem at Messina.
Do you know roughly at Messina how many people would go through?
I have to find that out how many annually.
We can put it in a record so as people look at our different hearing records, we can get perspective. Yeah.
Yes, I brought a lot of statistical data just in case you had questions like this. The Port of Buffalo in fiscal year 2000, and that's the last year for which we have final total figures, privately owned vehicles was nearly 8 million for Buffalo. That would be Buffalo and Niagara Falls. For the entire Customs Management Center, which is all of New York State, except for New York City, there was a total of nearly 11 million privately owned vehicles. So roughly 3 million are from Alexandria Bay to Champlain. The remainder are at Buffalo and Niagara Falls.
I wanted to, one of the questions that came up yesterday in our hearing was a question of customs employees are hired out of the central offices rather than regionally. Have you looked into that further, or could you explain to me briefly? I know I've heard this before, but why that would be true as opposed to regional hirings, and does that impact your ability? Do you look to hire in a region? Do you expect customs inspectors then to move between different ports and not be located at a particular port for an extended period of time? What's the philosophy?
Well, Chairman, let me start at the beginning of the process. It was about 2.5 years ago that Customs headquarters, working with OPM, decided to take the route of quality recruitment. Prior to quality recruitment, we did advertise locally for positions. But with the quality recruitment route, which is an effort to streamline the hiring process, candidates are solicited nationally, and they go onto a register. And they have a lot of the background work done already so that when a vacancy comes up in a particular part of the country, there's a ready list of people to be plugged in. And that system is supposed to work more smoothly than the previous system of you have a vacancy, you advertise, you hope you get some good candidates, etc. Once the people are on board from this quality recruitment effort, which is a national effort, it's not a local or regional effort. Once inspectors, for example, are at a port of entry and they would like to transfer to a different port within my area of management control, they would indicate that to their supervisor, and if there's a vacancy at the port where they want to go to, or if they want to switch with somebody, a mutual swap, that certainly takes place.
Without getting you into trouble with OPM, let me see if I can ask this question in a tactful way. Have you found, not qualitative, well, let me ask you this question. Do you believe qualitatively you're getting better employees under the system in a factual way in this zone? Not arguing your national policy right now. And secondly, can you get your vacancies filled more rapidly than you were able to before? Those are factual questions, not
Yes,
opinion questions.
Mr. Chairman. The speed with which people are coming on board, I have to say that right now, for example, we're reallocating within Customs to the management center that I have responsibility for, 47 positions. That's a reallocation from other parts of the Customs Service to the East Great Lakes CMC. We are not actually transferring people that are already in Customs. What's happening is that the Office of Field Operations has determined its usual attrition rate, and based on that attrition rate, is advancing the hiring and bringing additional people on board and allocating additional positions, 47 in number, to the East Great Lakes CMC. I have to tell you that we thought that that process would take longer than it's taking, but the first person in the Champlain area to get an EOD date, an entry on duty date, I believe is this week or in the very near future. Now, this decision to bring these people on board was just made within the past month, certainly since September 11th. So the speed with which we were able to plug into the quality recruitment lists worked very well. If we had to advertise locally and then get a list and then go through all of the background checks, it wouldn't have been nearly as quick. So it's this recent experience that I can tell you it has worked very quickly.
Do you think your retention will be as well if you're bringing in people from out into an area as opposed to somebody who was recruited from an area?
Well, the way the system works is that people do indicate a part of the country as their preference. So the people that have indicated this part of the country as their preference, even though they might today be living in San Diego, but they've always wanted to move here, or they have relatives here, and they've always wanted to get back to this part of the country, we find that when people do come here, they tend to stay. Our attrition rate from this area, from the East Great Lakes CMC, is very low compared to other parts of the country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chairman in his comments talked about how we have to watch this border crossing issue from the broadest perspective. Because if you fix one problem, it's like a balloon, and we squeeze it in one end and it comes out another. Both of you spoke about temporary assignments, handle the challenges, particularly coming after 911. Mr. D'Ambrosio, you talked about 100 officers temporarily coming to the northern border. Where do those officers come from?
Congressman, those officers have come from other parts of the country. I have to tell you that none of them have come to the East Great Lakes CMC. So I couldn't tell you their origin because they didn't come here.
They did not come.
No, they didn't.
Well then, how are you handling the 24/7 two officers, which did not exist before? How are you accommodating that? I assume that it's just through overtime and such. Is that true?
We, within the Customs Management Center, additional ports of entry are Syracuse, Rochester, and Albany. Because they are not as impacted as the land border is, we've been detailing people, one person from Rochester, one from Syracuse, and two from Albany since September 11th to land border locations. That's a total of 4 people from within the CMC. The rest has been taken up by a combination of resources, a lot of overtime. Our overtime has doubled in many locations. We have received great assistance from the National Guard. The New York State National Guard provided us with great assistance, especially immediately after September 11th. And we work closely with our partners in the Immigration Service to try and cover shifts as best we can.
We've done 2 things. We immediately following 9/11, we had agents in Buffalo and Albany who we detailed to the border to work with other government agencies. And most recently, headquarters has detailed U.S. Border Patrol agents from the Southwest to the border here to assist us and add security at the ports of entry.
Well, I guess my point, or I was hoping you would illustrate the point, that whatever we do to meet a challenge somewhere, if we're dealing in an ad hoc way, as you seem to say you are, which I understand, by the way, this is not a criticism of what you're doing. I think you've done an incredible job particularly under the circumstances, but that places pressures in other areas as well. And that obviously it all comes back to the nature of personnel. This is kind of a factual question, and maybe an opinion question as well. Given how we probably are going to demand these crossings be operated now, given the need to have 2 inspectors at these crossings, given the need to try to do things to accommodate these rather obscure road crossings that you talked about. How many personnel nationwide on the crossings themselves do you feel you're short right now to achieve a balance, to do the job you need to do, and to place a sustainable work burden on your personnel that right now, as I understand it, are operating at an incredible tempo, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, which most people would not be able to do over any extended period. Have you had a chance to look at that at all? Talking about thousands, hundreds,
As far as the entire Customs Service is concerned, Congressman, I really couldn't say. I can only tell you from the perspective of the East Great Lakes CAC. The 47 reallocated positions from other parts of the country was in response to my discussions with Customs headquarters to tell them that we needed to provide relief to inspectors here, that they cannot work indefinitely 16 hours a day, day after day. So we are getting 47 reallocated positions. In addition, we have requested additional National Guard support, which would help alleviate the customs staffing requirements, which would allow people to work an 8-hour day perhaps instead of a 16-hour day. So when the 47 reallocated positions are on board, and if we continue to have New York State National Guard support, we believe that we can handle the situation as it is now, assuming that the technology, which goes hand in hand with the people, is also available. For example, I did reference VACUS being installed here at Champlain. One high technology system can equal numerous customs inspectors. To devan one truck would take 2 or 3 inspectors, perhaps all day, depending on the type of commodity. And that would use their resources for the entire day. With VACUS, with the X-ray system, we would be able to do a truck every 5 minutes, going through the X-rays to see if there's anything inside that truck that merits a devanning. If we can avoid the manual labor that comes with lack of knowledge by applying high technology that gives us better knowledge so that we don't have to use the manual labor, then we can manage with the resources that we will have on board. So the two really do go hand in hand.
Well, I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's reasonable to expect the National Guard of the state of New York, who are people who come from private employment, as you all know, to become part of our permanent border presence, suggesting we have a real personnel challenge here that has to be met, where the responsibility lies, and that's with the federal government. If I'm asking something coming up here that you don't feel you can answer in a public forum, I understand. But right after 9/11, it was my understanding that the practice was inspect every vehicle, every truck crossing. True?
Yes.
That has now lessened in frequency. Is that true?
It has, Congressman, because a lot of our crossings, And believe it or not, even in the Buffalo area, a lot of the crossings are people that are seen every day, and they actually cross many times a day. For example, at Messina, New York, where the POV count is actually higher than Champlain, they're at over 1 million POVs a year. A lot of those crossings are the same people crossing 4 and 5 times a day, and they're local people. And immediately after September 11th, we said every car, every trunk, ID for everybody. But we had to step back and take a look and say, is this really reasonable? You know, the people that we see 5 times a day, the people that we know live in the area, that have lived here all their life, and we know are not a high risk. We brought some of that to the process so that not every car today is having its trunk opened or identification being provided.
That brings us to the personal, frequent traveler, frequent flyer program that's been kind of up and down. Is that being resurrected, if you will, working with the Canadian government to try to evolve a system that formalizes the frequent traveler situation that you just talked about?
The Customs Service has no specific system of frequent travelers. There's a test system at Port Huron, Sarnia, called Nexus. There is a Canadian system called CanPass, which allows for habitual crossers who have a card, who have had some background checks, to be able to cross more quickly. The Immigration and Naturalization Service has a system which I'm sure Ms. Holmes could explain better than I can.
We have a system at the Peace Bridge called AutoPass, and we've been using it for many years, and it allows people to apply, and we do background checks, and they are then able to move through the border, coming in our direction, much more quickly. We did suspend it after September 11, and we have not yet reopened it. It is a much more simple system than what they use in this Port Huron test called Nexus, but it is something I think we're going to be moving towards. Also, the INS has a biometric system called INSPass that we use at a number of airports for frequent business travelers, both U.S. citizens and aliens. And it's biometric with reading the hand. And that works, and we are able to continue to use that after September 11th because it does identify the individual, and the individual has had extensive background checks. So I think that is something that the agency is moving towards, is more expanded biometrics as the technology gets better. To continue to use that. It is more problematic at a land border port of entry because although the car, maybe the driver may be enrolled, all the passengers with the driver would not be. And whether the agency has decided to do that, I'd have to defer to our headquarters. But it is something that we are constantly looking at. I'd like to address the staffing issue, if I may. We obviously rely and work with the Customs Service to staff off ports of entry, and the National Guard has been of great help. Certainly if the bill is proposed that we were to receive 3 times the number of staff that we have here, we would be thrilled. Personally, I was thrilled last year when we received 8 additional land border positions for the 400 miles. I mean, that was a great increase for us. So any increases would be welcome. But we are right now canceling annual leave for our employees. They're working double shifts, they're working long days, they're working with very few days off. I think we are soon going to hit a point where they are tired and not well as a result of all of this work, and I don't know that we're going to get the relief soon enough to prevent concerns with their health. It is quite a lengthy process to bring people on board. We always anticipate attrition with the agency, and we have people in the queue ready to clear, but whether we'll get it, we haven't yet received any additional positions, unlike the Customs Service, so that I haven't been able to bring any additional staff on yet, and it will take time. Security clearances take time, training then takes time, and to make them contributing members of the inspectional staff here will take a while. And so I don't see any immediate relief to the staffing crunches that we're experiencing right now here at the land border post.
Appreciate that. You look somewhat envious towards Ambrosio in that regard. I'm sure he's looking enviously toward you in terms of recent funding bill, not just tripled authorization. Everybody was taking care of their unfortunately, in my view, didn't provide the funds for customs. That's something we've got to work at. Last question, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your patience. The generic hearing question, if you had two wishes that could be fulfilled from the United States Congress, what would they be? What could we do?
Well, two wishes would always be additional staff. I think we definitely need new staff, and we need some new facilities here on the northern, at least here in the Buffalo district, to the INS. Some of our facilities, if you've seen them, are have long since passed their prime. Some of them were built in the 1930s and 1940s, and they just don't meet the technological needs that we have now. And I think we could do a better job with better resources like that. I would have many more, but out of two of those would make my top two.
That's why I said two. I understand.
I would have to echo that we have the resources that will provide the quick transit of the volume at the northern border that continues to grow. Right now, there's been a temporary reduction because of the events of September 11th. But in the long term, the traffic volume at this northern border is going to increase. And it has doubled and doubled again in the recent decade. And the resources that are available at the northern border essentially are static. And they date back to years ago. The infrastructure is old. Many of these buildings date from the 1930s. Port of Champlain will be rebuilt within the next 3 years. That's the kind of advancement that I'd like to see at the northern border, that the major crossings have the kinds of facilities that will expedite the flow of trade and people, that the staffing be sufficient, and that the technology be there, and technology advance as we learn more about what will help move goods and people more quickly.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize, but I did want to address, thank you both for that. One final question, which you may not be prepared to answer right now, but if you're not, if you could provide it for the record. My office has received a number of communications from individuals who are concerned about the Canadian Pacific Railway that currently maintains 11 people at the Rouse's Point rail crossing. There's talk about an internal restructuring that may remove some, perhaps all of those 11 people. I'm concerned about what role those folks play, if any, in the current partnership that both of your agencies have with those firms that ship across this border, and what their absence may mean to the processing times if they're not there to facilitate the job that you have to do in inspection of railroad cars, which probably is not done as thoroughly as all of us would like right now on a certain necessity. What would that mean without those 11 people? I don't know if either of your agencies have a formal view or any familiarity with that, but if you could look at that, I appreciate it.
I have a few additional questions I wanted to follow up to. On the auto pass at Peace Bridge, the impasse that you referred to, but particularly the auto pass or the Nexus, how do they handle the passengers in the cars?
Well, people receive a decal that goes on their car, and they are allowed to go to a dedicated line. However, we still do have an officer who works in the booth just to be sure that there are no additional passengers. But it does make for a quicker inspection because people have been pre-cleared, and you know that.
So if somebody's been pre-cleared, they can't have somebody else in the car and still use the chip clearance.
Correct. Either that or it negates the whole point. So no, it's only for the people who have been cleared.
And if you get pre-clearance, can you take your kids with you?
We would do
usually
like
the whole family
Exactly.
pre-clearance? I wanted to follow up, Mr. Rosio. In your statement, you said this new VACUS system is coming to Champlain. That was a pre-September 11th commitment to do that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And what's the rough cost of that?
I recall discussions with my headquarters people that one Bacchus, the type that we're getting is called a portable Bacchus. It's called portable, but once it's set down, it really is not portable. It's roughly $1 million.
Have you heard any preliminary as to how the additional expenditures on the northern border might affect the zone? Do you put requests up? Have any process started inside Customs or INS at this point?
Concerning,
On the northern border, additional expenditures, like do you already have a wish list in?
we always have a wish list.
Has anybody asked you for opinions how that might change after September 11th, or was it a wish list that was sent in at the beginning of the budget cycle?
Well, certainly resource-wise, the necessity to staff ports with 2 people all the time changed after September 11th, and so we revised it then. The facility wish list has been in for years now. We are constantly pointing out deficiencies in the ports of entry, although some of them, the scene is included. GSA is already at blueprints to improve the port of entry there, and of course here at Champlain. So that was pre-September 11th.
In your case, for limited amount of dollars, do you put more of a premium on being able to have 2 staffers or for additional structural?
People, absolutely people.
And you seem to indicate a little bit different in yours as well.
I guess it's because the Customs Service is responsible for the commercial processing, and it's the technology that's needed for that endeavor that could help to eliminate need for lots of additional people. The Bacchus that I spoke about could help us to identify what is inside trucks or trains far better than people could, because we could never have enough people here at the northern border to look inside those containers the way that X-rays can. And Congressman McHugh mentioned Canadian Pacific at Rouse's Point. At the rail crossings at the northern border, there is a real deficiency of any kind of infrastructure. There are no facilities to examine cargo. There are no Bacchus units. And we have had, when you asked about what kind of lists have we had into headquarters, Customs headquarters has had lists of what is needed at rail crossings specifically for a long time, and is continually working with the rail companies to try and get examination facilities, and is trying to get funding in order to put Bacchus units at the rail crossings. When it comes to the smaller ports of entry, I would have to echo what Ms. Holmes said, that if we're going to keep stations and ports open 24 hours a day with staff with 2 inspectors, in order to reduce the overtime expenditures that are occurring now, you of course would need more staffing resources.
It's a problem, by the way, in the southern border too, with the rail. Central is 2 places together. You said that there's been a temporary reduction in traffic. Has this been, let me ask the question this way. I think both of you said before the hearing started and in your testimony that the delays are relatively short at this point along your sector. If traffic were normal and you continued at level 1, what would the delays be?
We would staff so that the delays would be minimal.
But you don't. Where would you get this? In other words,
They would work more time, they would have less time off, there would probably be more leave canceled. We are trying to give people days off, but our goal is, working with Customs, is of course to keep the waits as minimal as possible. So
and let me ask the question a different way. If you couldn't do those, in other words, how much would you say it's reduced, the traffic is reduced? 10%? 30%?
Well,
And obviously the first weeks were probably a greater drop than...
at Champlain alone, and I can't say just since September 11th, but just because of the differential in the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar over recent years, the amount of traffic has reduced significantly. I would say by at least 50%.
Well, in my testimony, I stated in 5 years it's gone from 5.5 million to 3.8 million here at Champlain. But since September 11, I would say, at least in the Buffalo corridor, Buffalo Niagara Falls, my staff tells me it's down about 30-40%.
Well, the reason I asked the question that way is that if you're already, my understanding from Mr. Ziegler is INS is getting fairly tapped out on the ability to use overtime, which is a whole other question we have, and some others, if you had that traffic go up 30 to 40% and you're already tapped out on your overtime and you've already canceled leaves, unless we get more personnel in at level 1, either we're going to have to back off of level 1 or get personnel relatively rapidly because we're hitting a wall. And we can't both try to say we want the economy to kick up and stay at level 1, and yet at the same time what we've seen, the terrorists historically have hit us somewhere in the world about every 6 months because they know we tend to back off. And also, if under this pressure any other major incident happens where there's basically they have to either come in by air, water, or land unless they're already in the United States. And it won't take but one more major border incident where somebody has crossed to see a desire to never go down from level 1. In fact, to not have unmanned crossings at all. The pressure is going to be huge on the government to try to address the question, and that's part of why we're trying to do this. I had one other technical question that I wanted to ask. We've been discussing a lot about language questions. My understanding from our hearing 2 weeks ago with the U.S. Marshals, Customs, and INS in Washington in personnel questions, that the INS, for example, has heavily focused on having Spanish as a second language. Yesterday, when I asked the knowledge about French and Farsi, that while you can get up to a 5% bonus, if I understand this, 3 to 5% annual increase in salary for learning a second language, few people are taking advantage of that, partly because they have to pass a State Department level test. One of my, for example, a couple of the people informally we talked to after the hearing actually were French, had that as their first language and could pass a test, which leads to the question is, could we even pass English tests if we were doing that? In other words, what we don't need here is somebody who can teach French or teach Farsi. The question is that in our system, particularly given the risk we are currently looking at in the United States, it is almost incomprehensible to some of us that we don't have people at the borders who can talk or have access even to people who can talk or read literature in the language that we're basically concerned about from a terrorist perspective right now. Do you know in Customs and INS whether there's been any discussion about making a more functional type test with a different kind of a bonus system that would say you don't have to be able to teach this language, you don't even have to be completely literate, but you have to understand certain things when people are communicating and maybe even know, for example, what anthrax looks like in Arabic and other another type of way. Congressman Wolf, who heads the Appropriations Committee, is looking in the conference report to try to figure out how we might do something in the language question and look for a creative way to do it. But we're running into very complicated walls and traditions with this. And I'm wondering how the tradition started, whether you have any grassroots suggestions in your zone, because it's not a particularly comforting prospect as an elected official or the average taxpayer to realize our language vulnerabilities at the borders. And it's not just in your services, it's across the board in the United States government right now.
Well, if I could address just the hiring issue for INS, well, we do something a little different from the Customs Service, and we hire through the OPM register, but we also use the VRA and we also use the Outstanding Scholar. And in this district, we make an effort to interview every applicant. And one of the things we look for is language abilities and place people appropriately at our ports of entry if they're applicants. So that if we have an Arabic speaker, and we do, we put that person in Montreal because in Montreal there's quite a large Arabic population. We have a number of French speakers here at Champlain, native speakers. We certainly, as an agency, teach Spanish. I know you're aware of that at our academy because the predominant number of our people do work either at the southern border or at airports where they deal with many Spanish people. speaking people, but as an agency, we certainly look to get people who have language ability to make a well-rounded inspector. But as far as recruitment nationally, national policies on that, I am simply unaware of the OPM rules.
At Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Messina, or Champlain, do you have anybody who can speak Farsi?
I do not, that I am aware of, no. I was pleased to have an Arabic speaker.
But you haven't heard.
We have an Arabic speaker in Montreal. In fact, we moved her to Buffalo to work with the FBI because they didn't have one either.
Do you have a local resource bank of people, if they
Yes.
had a question at the border that you could call?
Well, we certainly have translation services, and we use them all the time, yes.
Mr. Chairman, in the Customs Service, I'm not aware of any discussions along the line that you've asked the question, but I can look into that if you like.
We'll pursue it in Washington as well. Maybe you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If the second panel could now come forward. This will start with Mr. Douglas from the Plattsburgh North Chamber of Commerce. Appreciate that you could join us.
Well, thank you. Your colleague will confirm it's a dangerous thing to put me in front of you and ask me to talk about the border. It's a subject that I and the business community in this region feel passionately about and have been talking actively about and working actively on long before September 11th, which of course has brought fresh attention from new quarters to a lot of the things we were already talking about. Let me first of all, Mr. Chairman, welcome you to Montreal's U.S. suburb. It has come to be the way that we refer to ourselves because in a short bumper sticker sort of way, it frames the reality of what's happening in this area and other areas proximate to the border like Plattsburgh. We are becoming binational economic regions. There are a series of them across the U.S.-Canadian frontier. It is no longer about trade, it is about common economic regions. Trade brings about images of boxes moving back and forth, and I would suggest is something more related to the U.S. relationship with Bulgaria or Finland than it is with Canada at this point in time. This is a different sort of relationship. It's far more integrated, it's far more personal, it's far more important. It's actually far more precious, at least it certainly should be, to the U.S. and to all American people. I'd like, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to first of all talk in terms of a couple of frameworks within which I think we need to think about the border in places like Champlain. And then I would like to hit on several specific requests, recommendations, issues that our coalition has some definite opinions on. First of all, economics. It is important. It's vastly important to all Americans. 35 of our 50 states now have Canada as their main export market. If we talk about security, if we talk about economic security, Canada is our #1 source of economic security. And that certainly needs to be as much a part of thinking about security as other elements of security, which certainly also need to be thought about and addressed. I won't bore you with the numbers that we all hear all the time, the $1.8 billion a day in trade, the at least 1.8 million U.S. jobs directly dependent on simply selling products to Canada, never mind all of the other ripple effects of that. The stakes are absolutely huge. In our area, and we've submitted this for the record, our chamber does a study every 2 years to document, and we're the only place in the country that does this, to try to put numbers and then track them on the impact of a neighboring country, in this case Canada, on a border jurisdiction like ours, in this case Clinton County, New York, which is the area around Plattsburgh. 80,000 people, to put the numbers in some context. We've established that for calendar year 1994, that annual economic impact amounted to $784 million U.S. per year. Extraordinary. But then we further documented that in just 4 years' time, that doubled to $1.4 billion. It tells us the stakes are huge. It also tells us they're growing exponentially. We now estimate that 14% of the workforce in Clinton County, 14% of the workforce out of that 80,000 population works directly for a Canadian employer. Companies like Bombardier and Quebecor and Champlain Plastics and more than 100 Canadian employers we have here who are transcending that boundary and working both sides. So again, the stakes are huge, they're complex, and they're about far more than the boxes and trucks moving back and forth. which more and more now are a symptom or a sign of what's happening rather than the be-all and end-all of what's happening. I'm fond of pointing to the Canadian border as really America's #1 economic asset. And when you think about it in those terms and realize that that is indeed a fact, frankly, it becomes disgraceful to also realize that it's America's most neglected economic asset. It's most taken for granted. And finally, we're coming to grips with that. There have been many determined but often lonely voices like our good congressman here in the past. But their frustration, and it's natural, is that most of their colleagues are from places like Nebraska. And both to engage their attention, but then also to have them understand the kinds of relationships that areas like ours have with this neighboring country is difficult. But hopefully we have an opportunity now to get through some of that lack of awareness or misunderstanding and protect our economic security and make sure that these border crossings work in excellent ways, excellent in all regards, excellent in terms of protecting national security, excellent in terms of enforcing the laws that they have to enforce, but excellent also in terms of facilitating economic activity, because it's vital that all three of those pillars be upheld. The other framework that I really have to touch on behalf of our Canadian partners. They are our partners, our friends. We work with them every day. They aren't some other country we visit once in a while on a mission or do business with. It's more than that. And hope that we all agree that Canada and Canadians are not the enemy. And I have seen some reports in the national news media that concerns me, the degree to which even some hysteria is attempting to be created, that somehow Canada is some great center of bomb-throwing madmen, and that Canadians somehow are our enemy because they don't care about our security or whatnot. And there are things to be addressed, but we need to be very careful about doing it within a framework of, first of all, acknowledging and understanding our very special relationship with Canada. In NORAD and in NATO, there are allies. They're at our side right now in the campaign in Afghanistan. We know about the economic links that I've mentioned. They're at our side. Our stakes are the same in that way. But the relationship is more than that. We're neighbors, we're friends, we're family. And as with any family, the attack on America has been regarded as an attack on Canadians as well. And I can tell you it is felt very deeply there amongst all of our Canadian neighbors. Witnessed the 100,000 grief-stricken Canadians who gathered on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. It wasn't reported much in the States, which is too bad. It was an extraordinary event, an extraordinary bonding of the American and Canadian people in common mission. Or the outpouring of donations and volunteers, just one moving example of which I'll cite. The little rural community just across this imaginary line over here is called Lacal, Quebec, a very small community. Their municipality brought a $1,000 donation to our chamber to pass on to the American Red Cross just last week. I think if nothing else, that is the sort of thing that's happening constantly. That shows they aren't the enemy, they're our friends. We need to treat them as such. This relationship is truly special, it's unique in the world, it's of enormous value to all Americans. As we react to current security concerns, it is surely and clearly vital that we do nothing to undermine or diminish this connection with our Canadian friends. The economic security stakes are huge for our country and its people, but the subtler stakes inherent in preserving the most special relationship in the world between two nations and two peoples are even greater and must be appropriately cherished and fully secured as we go forward. We do not need a more restrictive relationship with Canada any more than we need a quote-unquote tighter border, if tighter means the raising of walls. What we do desperately need is a commitment by both our nations to take our past cooperation and partnership to new levels into new areas of endeavor, and we need border facilities and operations which are modern, efficient, and effective in balanced support of all three key objectives: security, enforcement, and trade and travel facilitation. In short, we need a smarter border and a smarter cross-border partnership. Let me touch on a few priorities, if I may, and recommendations. I speak on behalf of the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce, which is a 2,100-member regional business organization servicing the northeast region of the state of New York. I also speak for the Quebec-New York Corridor Coalition, which unites more than 1,000 chambers of commerce, businesses, economic development agencies, public and private interests in both Quebec and the state of New York, and for a group called the Committee of 100 Plus for a Port of Excellence at Champlain. First of all, we need the right tools for our people. And let me agree and concur and join in applauding the INS and Customs folks here at Champlain. I know across the country, but I know personally the folks here at Champlain who are doing an extraordinary job under great pressure with a great weight of responsibility on their shoulders without leave, putting extraordinary hours, keeping things moving here. It is because of that extraordinary effort, which we cannot expect them to engage in going forward forever, but it's because of that extraordinary effort that we have not had significant additional delays here at Champlain. Because they understand that multiplicity of responsibilities and that they have to make things work not just in one dimension, but in all dimensions here, and they're doing that, and I can't thank them enough. But we need to give them the proper tools to make sure that we continue to meet all of those three responsibilities, and one of those certainly is a proper facility. This Champlain facility, I think, is an embarrassment. It's a disgrace. I think the U.S. government needs to be embarrassed that it went for 40 years with this kind of inadequate facility, with the responsibilities that have been expected its people to carry out here. But we have an opportunity to fix that. With Congressman McHugh's assistance, we have a project in the first stage of the pipeline. There's a copy in the testimony submitted to you of the site plan prepared by GSA of the conceptual design for what we call a Port of Excellence at Champlain. We have some initial funding for design work, and some funding has also been provided to do a few initial things here to make the situation less awful. Not to fix it, but to make the situation less awful until we can get to this, which is the real solution. We want a facility here, and I suggest really we ought to be talking about a border of excellence. This should be what we should be seeking at all facilities, but I'll address Champlain. We want a facility here that is excellent in all respects. It is so modern, flexible, expansive, efficient, effective, that it is in fact the model of a facility in our U.S.-Canadian border. That it will actually draw and encourage commerce and travel, not discourage it. Some of the other things that have been talked about, applying technologies to moving people, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but facilities have to come first because it doesn't make a difference if you've got a Nexus pass and you're 2 miles back in the line and you can't get to that special booth to get through. So in places where we have critical facility needs like Champlain, we need to get on with the job because nothing else can really be applied and made to work unless they have the proper environment.
We didn't put the clock on individuals, but if you could kind of just summarize your other points, we'll insert your full statement in the record, draw some more out.
We need to accelerate this particular project. So we're hopefully not breaking ground 2004, hopefully as soon as 2003, and there ought to be ways to do that. Border staffing, we thanked the Congress for its action last week for the tripling. We need now to make sure that we get those folks out in the field and get them properly allocated. I'll state a number. Friends at U.S. Customs didn't. In addition to those that are already in the pipeline of being added to this facility, we need at least 50 additional U.S. Customs inspectors here at Champlain. That's what we hope our folks will be working for. Thirdly, shared security perimeter. We need to redouble the U.S. government's efforts and the Canadian government's efforts to work towards that goal so that somewhere down the road, hopefully in the not too distant future, we can put more of our security efforts on our common external border rather than having to focus within. I think there's a window there. I think the Canadian people are ready for it. They weren't 6 months ago. I think they may be now. And pre-clearance technologies expedite the development and deployment of Nexus and other types of pre-clearance procedures that can take some of the pressure away from the actual border points. Senator Clinton has suggested the creation of a position at the new Office of Homeland Security devoted to coordination of northern border activities. We cautiously endorse that with the caveat that it be very well defined if that does go forward. However, I think what she was touching on is a problem, which is the multiplicity of federal and state agencies dealing with places like Champlain and the often lack of coordination and agreement and common approaches and strategies among those. If not done through such a position as this, I hope the committee will consider other ways that we can bring greater coordination to the number of agencies that have responsibility. And then finally, while we work to do the right things, we also have to make sure that the wrong things don't get done, even if for well-meaning reasons. We need to make sure that the types of new exit controls that were envisioned under the original form of Section 110 don't rear their ugly head again. We don't need to go down those kinds of roads. There are kinder, gentler ways to address the kinds of needs that are seen and going after those kinds of things. I know there have been proposals out there, and there will be, in the well-meaning interest of national security to do things that actually would be wrong and injurious things to do here on the northern border. We need to be vigilant about that. With that, I thank you for the time. I told you it was dangerous to ask me to talk about the border.
Well, thank you. And if you could also submit for the record, depending what you've already sent to our office, if you're the different groups that you were representing have any summary reports. This is really good data to get into our hearing book, and as we look at other borders, it sounds like you're a little more developed in some of your reports.
Thank you. Chairman Souter, Representative McHugh, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony at the world-class Port of Champlain. I am proud to be one of over 13,000 Customs Service employees who serves as the first line of defense against terrorism and the influx of drugs and contraband into the United States. I'm a second-generation customs inspector. I have followed in the footsteps of my father, who was an inspector until his death in 1982. In light of the recent tragedies at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, customs personnel in New York and across the country have been called upon to implement heightened security at our land, sea, and airports. And may I say, I know of no greater way to consecrate the tragedy and the lives that were lost in New York than to do our job as we've done prior to September 11th. And it is an honor from the people that I represent to be able to help the nation in this endeavor. My chapter's jurisdiction covers over 17 ports of entry from Champlain to Alexandria Bay to Albany, New York. We further have the responsibility to cover Lake Champlain, parts of the Salmon and St. Lawrence River, and 2 of the Great Lakes for boat reporting. The boat reporting is done telephonically, as we do not have resources to patrol these waterways. We also cover freight trains in the Port of Champlain and Fort Covington. These trains are both in and outbound. Again, with limited resources, these conveyances are rarely, if ever, examined. To further complicate matters, part of the chapter at Fort Covington in Messina, New York, borders an Indian reservation, and while it is unpatrolled by federal agencies, it is not unknown to those who are professional smugglers looking to avoid detection. The task is daunting, to say the least. Customs personnel are working under a heightened Level 1 border security as a result of September 11th, and a fact that must not be overlooked is the business of the Customs Service, Immigration Service, and all other federal inspection agencies has not ceased. We still have an active border here. We still have our regular jobs to do. Many inspectors are working 60 to 70 hours a week with no days off. Unfortunately, there has been a relatively small increase in personnel nationwide, despite the dramatic increase in trade from NAFTA. The increased threat of terrorism, drug smuggling, and opening of new ports and land borders across the country each year. In fact, the Port of Champlain processes over 1 million private automobiles and approximately 500,000 commercial trucks and has a daily passenger train. The Port of Champlain has the responsibility for providing commercial support for the ports of Albany, Messina, and Ogdensburg, and Alexandria Bay. My career spans 19 years in law enforcement. It includes 2 federal agencies and 1 county agency. When I began my federal career with the Immigration Service in 1984, there were over 75 full-time customs inspectors at Champlain. When I transferred to the Customs Service in 1989, the number was about 65. As I sit here today, in Champlain, there are 43 full-time customs inspectors. Customs recently conducted an internal review and commissioned the company of Price Waterhouse at the tune of over $1 million to create what was called the Resource Allocation Model, the RAM. And it showed nationwide that Customs needs over 14,776 new hires just to fill its basic mission. In fact, according to the Resource Allocation Model, the Port of Champlain would need over 79 new inspectors, 2 canine enforcement officers, 4 import specialists, and 12 special agents alone. The administration and the Congress must show the men and women of the Customs Service they respect and support the difficult and dangerous work these officers do 365 days a year by providing an increase in funding to the Customs Service. This country needs to make some decisions about the northern border. As a wise man once told me, in reference to the northern border, he said, "I have been to many castles in Europe, and none have only 3 walls." Nothing could be truer about the northern border. The Port of Montreal receives over 500,000 containerized shipments a year, and many of these are placed on trucks and rail cars destined to this port. We need an increase in not only staffing, but technology, and we need the right technology. We do not need the technology that is simply the lowest bid and does not perform the job for us. Deploying any new hires to our nation's port along the area ports at the northern border would be a good start, especially since international terrorism has forever changed the landscape of this nation. Another important issue that needs to be addressed is law enforcement status for customs inspectors and canine enforcement officers, and also our brothers and sisters in the Immigration Service. The U.S. Customs Service inspectors and canine officers continue to be the nation's first line of defense against terrorism and smuggling of illegal drugs and contraband into our borders. Customs seizes millions of pounds of narcotics annually. Customs Service inspectors have the authority to apprehend and detain those engaged in terrorism, drug smuggling, and violations of other civil and criminal laws. And for example, it was a customs inspector who stopped a terrorist attack for New Year's Day 2000 by identifying and capturing an individual at Port Angeles, Washington. Canine enforcement officers and customs inspectors carry weapons. We have to qualify 3 times a year, yet we do not have the law enforcement status. We are being denied the benefits given to our colleagues who they have been working beside to keep our country safe. Customs employees face real dangers on a daily basis, and granting us law enforcement status would be an appropriate and long overdue step in recognizing the tremendous contribution. I'm extremely proud that Congressman McHugh has co-sponsored H.R. 1841, which would give us this important status, and I would encourage the subcommittee to consider this very important legislation. In closing, thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony on behalf of all my colleagues in the Customs Service, and especially the employees that I have the honor and privilege to represent in Chapter 138. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, Senator McHugh, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the members of the committee for traveling all the way to Champlain to listen to our views excuse me, and the things that we need at the for border security. I would also like to thank you for allowing me to present my views. I've been an inspector with the service for approximately 13 years and involved with the local 2580 for 10 years. Only the last 3 I've been involved with an officer. Currently, I'm the vice president of our local union. Prior to that, I spent 23 years in the Air Force as a security police officer. Inspectors in general has a problem retaining inspectors at the Champlain Port of Entry. There's no exception. It is a constant struggle to keep inspectors. Many newly hired officers leave inspections for other federal law enforcement agencies when they realize promotion potential is poor for inspectors. INS is treated as an entry-level position used for entry-level real law enforcement occupations. Others leave the service altogether. For example, at this port, we recently had one officer leave for better benefits to customs. That happened just this week. One will be leaving to go to Secret Service, and we had a 20-year veteran that recently resigned and went to work for construction because of the lack of pay and benefits and retirement package. There was just no promotion potential for him either. We have 2 more officers. We have one that's leaving INS to go into the New York State Police. We have another one that's going into Secret Service. The service has spent thousands of dollars on each officer to provide a 16 or 18-week training course at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia. It is a terrible waste of INS and taxpayers' money to bring these people on, only to have them go somewhere else. But it does provide a ready pool of pre-trained applicants for other agencies. Treating immigration inspectors as clerks, not law enforcement officers, with no promotion potential does not serve the interest of the individuals, the service, or the government. We work side by side with U.S. Customs inspectors doing the same type of work, yet their agency has provided their officers with a much better pay and retirement. If 2 officers, one immigration, one in customs, start on the same day, working side by side until retirement, the customs officer will earn more money, have more time off, and will receive better pension, thousands of dollars higher than that immigration inspector. The INS has great employees who want to step up and do their part in this great land. 3 times in less than 2 years, we've been put on heightened security alert. Each time, inspectors have risen to this challenge, working double shifts, giving up leave, standing in the brutal North Country winters, conducting inspections such as we did during just a few years ago. Most of the terrorists apprehended were apprehended on the northern border. In the year 2000, the Champlain, New York Port of Entry initiated 248 criminal prosecutions. The U.S. Attorney pursued prosecution in 139 cases. The cases were for document fraud, paid alien smuggling, and reentry after deportation. We daily deal with aggravated felons, many of whom are wanted. These numbers do not include violators turned over to the local law enforcement for prosecution or state officials. I think it should be brought to the committee's attention that INS officers arrest more individuals than any other federal law enforcement agency combined. The time is long overdue for INS inspectors to be brought up to the same GS level as other officer corps positions within INS. We should receive law enforcement retirement in our positions. The service and Congress must change the emphasis placed on appeasing the airlines and business interests and concentrate more on enforcing the immigration laws designed to protect the United States. As recently as August this year, the Buffalo District proposed disarming our detention officers traveling with prisoners because the airlines did not like the officers carrying their weapons on board aircraft. All federal law enforcement officials bury their head in the sand on the issue of control of local waterways. Government officials since before the French and Indian War have recognized Lake Champlain as a primary invasion route into the United States. Yet the agencies charged with control of Lake Champlain refuse to accept this responsibility for the protection of the homeland. The I-68 program has only facilitated the complete disarray on the lake. Government officials are quick to forget the last time the United States was invaded as an act of war was September 11, 1814, through Lake Champlain at the Battle of Plattsburgh. Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland were also attacked on that same day. Inspectors in the Buffalo District have been ordered by the service to inspect boats that are hundreds of miles away up in the St. Lawrence via television cameras. The inspector cannot see the boat, nor what is in the boat, nor can it tell if there's any additional passengers on that boat because the individual comes before a camera, which is not even located anywhere near where the boat comes in. Quite often, the picture is fuzzy. We can't make out who the person is. Sometimes we can't even get a picture. Sometimes we can't get the sound. But during the current crisis, ineffective remote inspections continue. Yet the same service felt that it was necessary to double staff each port of entry. It's time to regain control of our waterways. The service must rethink a number of policies if we are to be effective. We must have effective control of visitors within the United States. The student program is out of control. Visa waiver program needs modification. The work permits for trade NAFTA and L1s must be controlled. An immigrant to Canada only has to live in Canada 3 years to naturalize. Then they can obtain permission to live and work in the United States easily by using these same programs. The computer systems used by the service are archaic databases which do not effectively work. I will be supplying a written statement from our local president which addresses some of these same subjects, which I don't want to get into. In closing, I would like to say that our inspectors understand that most people we deal with are honest tourists and business people. We appreciate the fact that they want to be cleared as quickly as possible. We want to inspect them as efficiently as we can, but we do not wish to put our country in jeopardy for the sake of convenience. Finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank the new INS Commissioner, Mr. Ziegler, for his recent expressions of support for INS inspectors. For too long, the concerns of employees, including inspectors, have taken a back seat to the wide range of other issues, such as technology and training. Mr. Ziegler's support for law enforcement retirement benefits for immigration inspectors and pay grade increase will do much to improve morale, effectiveness, and retention of our most experienced frontline workers. It also represents the significant departure from policies of past INS commissioners and hopefully will mean a new era of better management criteria for our agency. Again, we thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for this opportunity to present our views from the local union.
First, thank you, all three of you, for your testimony. This is one of the great reasons why we have field hearings as opposed to just in Washington. First, we're in and out all the time, and here we get to have concentrated attention, and we also tend to hear very pragmatic intense. It's not even just that the people are different. It's that in Washington, often they come in and the testimony is just more inhibited. Here you each let fly from a number of different points, and I have a couple of comments I want to make, then I'll yield to Mr. McHugh for questions, but I have quite a few questions to follow up too. I want to assure you of a couple things. One, Mr. Ziegler came in aggressively, both in our committee in arguing for the law enforcement and pay grade, the pension, but also at a meeting sponsored with Chairman Wolf and I'm trying to think who the ranking Democrat is on the committee. But they had about 30 members there, and he lit a fire of concern about the INS because so many Americans are looking at the border right now, and we're and I need to point out for all of you here that authorizing and appropriating are different, and we've authorized the new agents. We're appropriating more money, but it isn't the same level. That's what's still being battled over. But the day before he spoke to this group, INS had lost 5 agents, and he pointed out that already there's a shortage of applicants, and here we are looking at tripling these things, and we're losing people. There is a disconnect between the public policy statements and the practical pressures that we put on at the grassroots, and that's partly what we're trying to do is figure out how to address this question. A second thing related similarly to that same subject is in the we're going to deal with this week in airport security is that when we boost one agency, where do people think the employees are going to come from? If we suddenly federalize all the airports and fire all the existing security people, what is that going to do to state and local law enforcement and the customs and INS? It's going to be like a giant sucking sound, particularly if you have differentials in benefits, that we have to think through in these steps of how we're going to approach this and how fast somebody can be trained to bring into these different things. Because what we heard at our hearing 2 weeks ago was that 37% of new employees into particularly customs and INS are from local law enforcement. That 30% are retired military, and we're trying to keep people from not retiring from the military at a time when we're in conflict too. And this is somewhat of a zero-sum game, particularly if you need trained people. And we've got to sort through this process, make sure our benefit structures are logical, that our law enforcement status things are logical, because we're clearly facing the pressures. And I understand the economic side, but we also need to acknowledge that, in fact, Montreal has become a center and some of the activities that have been around the country, and we've got to watch that. Clearly, in narcotics, ecstasy is coming from the Netherlands and largely into Canada and into the East Coast. Unlike where we've been so focused on the southern border with cocaine and heroin, we have a different problem in the precursor chemicals and in the ecstasy directly. So it isn't even just the current terrorism question, it's the narcotics question as to how we're going to deal with the border. But I have some technical follow-up questions I want to ask, but I'll go to Mr. McHugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quite honest, I can't imagine what I would ask any of these 3 gentlemen that they haven't already told me many times. I even know where Thomas buys his ties. But I do want to, first of all, let me associate myself with the remarks that you made. The candor that you receive at these kinds of hearings, I think, are extraordinarily helpful, and help all of us to better understand what is happening and where the battles are being fought. And in places like Champlain, I don't think it's lending toward the extreme to say we are fighting the battle. And with respect to Mr. Buford and Mr. Keefe, they are on the front lines. And I would hope, through my comments earlier, it's come through the admiration that I hold for those individuals who pre-911 work so incredibly hard with such effectiveness to do a very thankless but very necessary job, and that has only grown dramatically since that time. I know that Gary is going to be able to provide you with data to your heart's content. He has been to Washington, testified before other subcommittees in support, and as he mentioned, we have had some success, and it's probably due more to his persuasiveness that unlike some, when he's in Washington, he speaks about the same way as he does here. So the appropriators were very supportive as a result. But as he said as well, we need to do a better job. And I think I don't know who scheduled which panels, but I think it's illustrative that you would have these three individuals sitting at the same table, because there is no separating what happens at this board and the resources that we provide to the federal agencies involved there, from the ability of the business community here in this part of the North Country to thrive. You don't have to drive too far to the west of this particular community to find unemployment figures in the double digits. To find economic challenges that are very, very perplexing and in conventional terms are defying solutions. I don't mean to suggest that in this corridor there are not challenges, because there are. But this part of New York State is doing very well in relative terms to other parts of certainly my district and other parts of the state. And Gary, am I not correct? The unemployment rate here in Clayton County is actually below the state level now, which is perhaps may not seem like such an achievement, but in this part of the world it truly is one. And that's because of this partnership. So I really don't have any questions for these individuals, but I just wanted to underscore what I attempted to say in my opening comments about the need to do better across the board. Facilities, as has been attested to here today, VACUS and other kinds of technology to allow them to do a even more effective job. But in my opinion, first and foremost, and as Carl mentioned, obviously to bring more people on, we have to address the quality of the profession that we ask these professionals to do as well. And again, I know that's why the chair is here. I appreciate it. So I yield back.
Thank you. I take it, Mr. Duford, that you don't believe that 3 Coast Guard boats, 2 of which aren't here, are enough to patrol Lake Champlain?
I think what I'm talking about mainly is crossing from Canada into the United States. We have, not only do we have the Coast Guard, but we have Border Patrol, we have the Sheriff's Patrol up here in the summertime. There's still an opportunity at night, during the nighttime, for people to come across into the United States through Lake Champlain. It's been proven, it's been done in St. Lawrence many, many times, sneaking aliens across, smuggling across at night. And the time of the year doesn't seem to make any difference, even in the wintertime. They take the chance of trying to cross the St. Lawrence River.
We talked about this a little bit yesterday. I'm more familiar with Michigan, and as I looked at, particularly Northern Peninsula, that as I looked at how we try to seal the borders and basically channel people through it and orderly and as efficient as fast as we can, the logical thing is that people who don't want to follow the law are bound outside that system. And for example, Manitoulin Island to the United States, which sits in the middle of this, we move up to Sault Ste. Marie, you can't quite walk across the water, but it doesn't take much of a rowboat to get across. When you go through the islands here and the border, what becomes apparent between the 2 interstates and the Roussas Point is that there's water coming in between two different points. How exactly would you monitor this, particularly at night?
When they initially built the bridge, it was my understanding that the contracting people were willing to put up a location for inspections. Why that never materialized, I really don't know. As it is now, there's 3 locations that we can go to in Ross's Point to inspect boats. But even during the daytime, we can see boats coming down that never come in. Were they pre-inspected by immigration? We don't know because they just keep going down the waterway. We're not sure. We have no idea what it's like at night.
Not having a really good picture of exactly what's around the water at different points there, or the fishing and pleasure boating that goes on in the water, is it a border that moves freely? In other words, do fishermen move across? People have cottages, go up to a boat marina for lunch at another place? Is this a big tourism factor too? And how much would it inhibit having crossing points or checking points? I mean, is it feasible? Mr. Douglas, do you have any?
I think it is. It is a shared lake, 2 states and 2 nations, and people do, as they do on the lake, as you say, go down the marina, go to the restaurant, visit Plattsburgh, go back and forth. There are Canadians who have second homes, in Vermont and in Quebec, for example, go back and forth. We certainly don't want to inhibit that. The also important to understand is that Lake Champlain is actually part of a throughway on the water. The Hudson River is connected to the Champlain Canal at the south end via the State Barge Canal system, and the Chambly Canal to the north takes pleasure craft up and down to St. Lawrence. So there are boats that are going vast distances through the lake onto other places. There certainly are solutions, and Dick McCabe, the IMS Court Director here, has had a pet project for several years that we just haven't seemed to be able to get to come together. There is an abandoned bridge pier over in the village of Rouse's Point where it would seem reasonable and feasible to establish a docking place where, at least with remote camera technology or so on, Quebec visitors could easily stop, check in, be seen, versus just going through. What they're expected to do now, in the absence of a public place where they can stop and do that sort of thing, frankly, is to stop and check in via a private marina which charges them to stop. So it isn't rocket science to understand that, well, yeah, I think I can avoid that docking charge. I'm just going to go through. You need to have a no-cost public docking place where you expect them to stop and make that kind of change.
Mr. Keith, one of the things, because I'm interested about the night running, whether it be snowmobiles or boats, it's met with some of the Canadians last night. This isn't about catching somebody with turkeys where they're selling turkeys for additional money. This has become a major route we heard over on the other side at Highgate, and also from a DEA briefing yesterday afternoon, that we have people walking across with backpacks with this really high-grade Quebec Gold or BC Bud variations of marijuana, which is not marijuana, it's closer to cocaine than marijuana in its content mix. That it is not obviously being supplied for this zone. There aren't enough people in this zone given the amount that's coming through. It's predominantly become a major route for certain things for New York and Boston. We heard from both regions. That we're not, like I say, we're not trying to catch this random person who's trying to avoid a customs question. Could you give me your input from the customs perspective of particularly narcotics or the smuggling individual across?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. May I say you gentlemen are very quick on this because I've been very impressed by some of the things that you said about the town. I think you have to look at law enforcement. And the essence of law enforcement has always been, you're not going to have a police officer or a presence at every single location. The true essence of law enforcement is the deterrent factor. So what we have to be able to do, and the word seal is not inappropriate. I agree with you. We do not want to seal the border. But we want to be able to put the most deterrents there to let people know that we are checked. And that can be done in a variety of ways, and there are a lot of solutions. There is personnel, and we do support, of course, personnel, and this is our profession. We think we do it very well, but we also are pragmatic enough to understand that we're not going to put agents and inspectors at every location. So that has to be augmented with technology. And that begs the next question, is the technology just can't, it's got to be the latest science, it's got to be up and running stuff that we can use, and there's tons of it out there. And I was on a negotiating team with the National Union, and we did something with what was called remote video inspections. And the concept itself is not a bad idea. And again, it jumps back to what I just said about the deterrence. Where it kind of fell down was the technology was not adequate enough to do what we need to do to give us a comfort level. And I'll never forget, I was in Washington negotiating this, and I'll never forget, I walked by, it was down doing the tourist things I've done thousands of times, and I walked by the White House. And these cameras for remote video had a delay. Basically, you would be seeing what was happening 15 seconds after it happened. And I said to myself, and I said to the people the next day, I bet you if I jumped that fence, by the time I hit the ground, in the White House grounds, somebody would be on me. And I bet you they don't have a 15-second delay in the video transmission. And my point is this, they shouldn't. It's very important. But it is also very important to do the best deterrent job we can do at the border. We don't want to do low budget at the border. I hear a lot about national defense, and I echo that. We need a strong military. We need them to be ready. But there is no greater presence than those of us that stand on the line at the border. There's many things we can do. My boss, I know, is looking into some infrared technology just to try to see if we can get an idea of what's there. But what we have now is nothing. You know, and one of the complaints that I've heard from the people I represent is here we are out here doing a level 1 alert. I'm answering a phone, clearing a boat in one of the Great Lakes. I mean, that's just unacceptable. Again, we don't want to choke off the legitimate trade. We don't want to choke off the legitimate tourist industry. And I don't think we have to. But we do have to do something more than nothing.
Mr. Duford and the INS inspectors, and first let me thank both INS and Customs people for the amount of hours you're putting in. We've learned the hard way in Washington where we were focused in this latest anthrax scare on our offices. We found out that the postal workers put their lives on the line, and we should have been checking at the core place where it was coming towards us. For whatever reason, that wasn't suspected that was going to happen, but you were at the front lines, and we thank you at the front lines for trying to, in effect, make the rest of America safer, whether it be narcotics or from terrorists. But as INS inspectors, if they're working long hours and losing their vacation time, does that impact their ability to screen, particularly at the end of the shift? Realistically, from a human standpoint, what happens?
If we're working extended hours, I'd say towards the end of those extended hours, it might possibly do that. I know since we've gone at heightened security, our alertness has been so much more advanced than it ever has in the past because of the concerns that might be coming into the United States through Champlain or one of the smaller ports. I can't vouch for anybody else, but I know that the way I do things when I'm out there in that primary line and I'm talking to people, I ask all the questions that's necessary to ask. I look in that vehicle, I go through everything. I don't want to have anything come through here and then have it come back and say, well, one of our inspectors at the Champlain Port of Entry, because he wasn't doing his job, something came into the United States that should not have been in here. So I'd say after probably working a double shift, maybe towards the end of that double shift, maybe my alertness is not going to be quite the same. But as of what happened after September the 11th, I'm at a lot more heightened security, and I believe the rest of our people are too.
It's a question of how much you can push your adrenaline button for how long. It's a human physical question. It isn't a desire or competence question. If you continually tax people, it is a human nature. I mean, we probably become a little less concerned about the particulars of an amendment that's offered when they hold us in at 2 o'clock in the morning than if it's in the middle of the afternoon. And there's a question of safety risks here too if we continue to use employees the way they are. Let me ask you a couple other questions. In the physical changes here at this particular border crossing, do you see fencing and lighting additional required? What equipment would you focus on most to assist with the INS?
In the last year, our technology at Champlain has increased a lot. I'll give you an example. We have license plate readers now, which we never had before. And as a result of this, and the technology of these computers is quite advanced. I don't have to spend my time reading the license plate and not being able to look at that individual when I'm trying to talk to them. Now I can look at that person, I can look into them in the eye. And I only have maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds at the most to ask questions that might tell me this person has to go in for a secondary. There's something that's not quite right about this person. I do not like his answers. We're going to have to send him in. Where before, the technology that we had was basically ourselves. We're down there, we're typing the license plate in before we ever look at the person, and by the time we got done, we're just about finished with our questions. I think the lighting has improved quite a bit, which is really necessary for what we do, especially at night. For some of us older people, it's hard to see things that we can see during the daytime. The lighting, the license plate readers, and all the other technology that we have out there on that line to help us do things, it's increased quite a bit. Instead of having one officer on the primary now, we now have two officers. So you've got one officer that's asking questions and doing the computer work. We've got another officer that's actually taking a look inside the vehicle, the van, the car, the truck, whatever it is, and looking in the trunk, inspecting the trunk. So we've basically doubled since the 11th of September what we're doing out there in that line, and I think it's been for the better.
Mr. Douglas, one of the things we're looking at, clearly we're going to do more of the fast pass, pre-clearance, that type of thing, particularly if we have to either stay at level 1 or even tighten further on the border.